Oh, hi there. I wanted to make a quick video um, issuing a historical challenge to Samantha Derrick, who uploaded a video of a Muslim man speaking of slavery and how it's not entirely indicative to Europeans against black people in the United States. This is very much correct, but there are some factual things that he painted in a different light. I highly doubt Samantha Derrick had anything to do with it, but she uploaded it and she removed the ability to make comments. There was no room for discussion. So I'm making a video explaining why this Muslim is wrong. Yes, there was slavery. And Slav, the word he said was a derivative of slave. There is some validity to that. But the thing is, that was the word we used to describe it, not the word they used. So that's one thing. And the Slavs were actually quite often slaves of Western Europeans to begin with in centuries past. Most notably with the Roman Empire, but not only with the Roman Empire. Also, the Vikings took many slaves and sold them for the most part. Other ethnic groups were in power at different sorts of times and were more effective, less effective. Um, they described the most powerful man and most wealthy to have ever existed. They portrayed him as a black male, like your standard African black guy from the United States. Inaccurate. Total bullshit. Um, they were Muslims and there were black Muslims, but it was still a nepotistic thing. The blacks had more in common with the Arabs and they intermingled than the Europeans. But there was still a glass ceiling for black Muslims, like actual black Muslims. And for Western powers, same difference. Bunch of niggers out in the fucking desert. Whether they're, Arabic Muslim or black Muslim, it really doesn't make any difference. And I mean, me using the N word will probably mean this video gets censored, but it's a serious topic, and using the word nigger should be allowed as they use far more derogative terms against white people. And the nature of this video and what it was really saying was more offensive. And it's to fill the minds of pseudo intellectualism. I noticed he couldn't help but bring up the Quran and Islam, and it's like, shut up. Islam and Quran, much like Christianity and the Bible, were more the language that was used to justify wars and to communicate wars amongst each other in history past. It was simply a language. We have new languages now, and we reflect upon the lessons of old, and they've been revised since then, which was exactly the point. Western powers upgraded what slavery is. Because you can argue if you work for a Walmart or anywhere where you're making minimum wage and you're there 5 days a week doing something you don't particularly enjoy, yeah, you're still kind of a slave. You might get fed a bit more, you might have a roof over your head, but if you're doing something you don't enjoy and you don't get paid very much for doing it, you are still a slave. And even if you're getting paid a lot of money, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, in a way, you're a different section, a higher class of slave, but you are still a slave. And ideally, that is what you want, is to get in a position where you're making money, not doing things you don't want to do, and you're living a happy life. That's the definition of really what a not being a slave is. And we do live in an age where you have to use the word not being a slave. And the thing is, they don't call it slavery; they call it employment. But that's the same thing. doing something you don't want to do and either getting paid very little or, depending on your circumstances. And the Western powers, what they wanted to do was to staple that word with simply slavery, and slavery was abolished. And there's some wisdom to this because in the generations that preceded it, they didn't feel as though they were slaves because, work has to be done. People have to do certain jobs, and not all jobs are fun, and most of them aren't. But they do need to be done by somebody. So all they did was change the language around those particular jobs, and gave them a few more benefits, and essentially they became slaves under a different name. And the black Muslim slavery that he was speaking of was an entirely different thing. It was a savage country, and this black Muslim probably didn't look a damn thing like um, the slave master that he was discussing. The blacks never got it together to really get slaves until they started selling them, really, and then that did make them the master of slaves, the mind of the people, as this person proclaimed he was. Now, you will see evidence of intermingling between blacks and Muslims. There are black people who have facial characteristics that are more similar to that of Arabs than they are to black people, although their skin is black. And a lot of Egyptians, a lot of black supremacists, I should say that Egyptians were black. They were not. They were Arabic, Persian blend, mostly. And so theoretically, they were not white, but we are still fighting a war with people in that area of the world, if you didn't notice. And the way how history is told is by the victor. Um, we proudly stomped all the way through Egypt and all of the northern Middle Eastern countries, regardless of what puppet leaders are in there today, and took what they had, which was far from perfect. They did not have a perfect society. They were not the best engineers, and they were not even good people. They weren't. They're projected as that because that's the storytelling of history. It is for young people to look upon and begin learning, and if they're interested, which I am, in learning about history, is that they go to the proper channels to learn it, efficiently and the correct version. Because according to different people, you're going to hear different versions of histories. Try listen to a Scotsman's version of history. It's mind-numbingly irritating. And blacks are going to look up to this philosophy that there were black Muslims that looked like themselves throughout history that were slave masters, and it's not entirely accurate. There are a lot of black supremacists who believe the Egyptians were black. As I said before, same difference. They were the enemies of the Western powers. And the reason slavery in the United States happened was for two reasons. One, the jobs needed to be done by somebody. And two, they were the enemy and still are. And this is not to negate the fact that there were also white slaves as well. As a matter of fact, the population of Europe and Africa and everywhere else in the world has only really gone up exponentially in the last 100 years or so. So yes, there was a labor shortage. It's because there weren't that many people. And World War One and World War Two didn't help. I mean, afterwards, but before that, there simply wasn't millions and millions of people to build structures on such a large continent as North America. There simply wasn't. And there were hostile natives in North America that the army had to deal with. Not all of them were well, for the most part, they were all hostile. Those nice pictures depicting them, looking all ceremonial and dignified and all that, it's not true. They didn't even make totem poles as good as they say they did. I mean, there were a few tribes that did, but most of them didn't. most of them didn't even make totem poles to begin with. And because, throughout history, there have been tribes in North America that have been more wealthy than others. Empires have come and gone, except native culture, they didn't really build any lasting structures, so they had to kind of embellish what structures they built, which for the most part were totem poles and teepees. Okay, so that aside, there's a lot to go over with the conflicts in the Middle East and how that's relevant to how history is taught today. It is important that slavery and the definition of it is changed, but not in the way that this Muslim pastor was speaking of. It's about a delicate balance of power, and unfortunately, the way how history has taught slavery over the years has created this sort of victimhood amongst black people, as if they had it any worse than anybody else because there were a few rich Caucasian people who were the slave masters. There were a lot of people who were poor who came over here. Those poor sons of bitches that were on the boats that were white people didn't have it any better than well, maybe a little bit better, but not that much better than the blacks. And again, yeah, those were all jobs that needed to be done. And somebody had to do them. And as is today, certain jobs still need to be done, and they're not fun jobs. And getting back to the victimhood of black people and how they can always revert back to, more recent history and go, well, the whites were brutal slave masters. Historically speaking, compared to previous generations of blacks, they were angels. Really, they were angels to the black people. It doesn't matter that, you watch Django and you see the slaves getting beaten up all the time. In comparison, they were far kinder. If you want to, delve into the history books as an excuse for why you have your logic. I mean, I prefer to look in the now and talk about history and separate the two, but some people don't do that for whatever reasons. And the victimhood thing for the blacks, for one thing, all modern day blacks are not the same slaves as they were when the 13 colonies. They're not. I mean, unless they're in some really horrible place. But then again, there are plenty of white people in really horrible places too, like prison. And the issue lies where there is white guilt. I have no idea why anyone would feel white guilt. I certainly don't. But there are some people that do and feel they need to be charitable to black people at the expense of other white people, which really makes them a sleazy sellout. They're no better than the Muslim Arabs. They're not. Selling out another white man to help out a black man because you feel guilty about the 13 colonies, that makes you a scumbag. That doesn't make you anything better. If it were a different context, you'd sell out a black man to help out a white man, but then that would be called racist. It's a different word, but you're still shafting somebody to benefit somebody else. And that is important because it is played into the psychology of Americans and the media that's pushed it, namely the Jews, because the Jews are so afraid of how they fucked up over the years. For one thing, the Arabs would not be so pissed off with us if it had not been for the Jews. For two, Jews have a tendency to revert back to World War II as if it happened to them directly, and most of them it didn't because unfortunately, as sad as it is, a lot of them have passed on since then, as well as the people who did it to them. But they still cling on to that. And any white gathering where it's strictly, we're here because we're white and we need to protect our liberty and things like that, it immediately gets associated with Ku Klux Klan, Nazism, and everything else. And really, those are Jewish buzzwords at this point that disable white people from gathering together and looking at a problem. And it is Jewish media that has perpetuated this black victimhood in more recent, propaganda history. And their push for power is because they've got to change the balance of power for themselves, and they don't want white people, to understand that circumcisions, they still happen in various forms. There's different types of circumcisions. Basically, they're mutilating dicks. That's what the Arabs do. That's what the Jews do. And this little fact has got Jews so paranoid that in recent decades, since after World War II, they've been going around mutilating dicks all around. Millions and millions of dicks they've mutilated. But no, you can't criticize the Jews, because if you do, that means Holocaust, Auschwitz, everything to go with it. And then Inglorious Bastards. What is that? They're the Avengers, right? The Avengers were cocksuckers and do not deserve the prestige that they got in history. Because what was an Avenger after World War II? Basically, it was a Jew boy gang running around beating the shit out of white people who had any interest in, being proud of being white. They were immediately labeled as Nazis and beaten the shit out of. You could get the shit beaten out of you today for being proud and being white. And not just by the Jews, obviously by the blacks, definitely by the blacks, by the Arabs, the Muslims, all of them. And they are not ones to talk. They are not. No, not by a long shot. However, it doesn't work to the Jew boy advantage right now to point out this fact, because they're still on the defensive because of all these decades of them not being punished for being a bunch of dick mutilators. And, that's not a very, that's not a title you want, the master of dick mutilation. And the white people who agree with circumcision, guess what? You're a Jew boy. Doesn't matter if your skin is white. It's the same as with the black Arabs or the black Muslims. You are the enemy. That is as simple as that. And, this is actually quite the topic, because history differs from ethnicity to ethnicity, obviously. And there are truths, alternate facts, of course. And all of these are in conjunction with modern day times and how history is told. And when I saw this Muslim pastor start talking, I could have set him straight on exactly why he was wrong and what he was bullshitting about and what audience he was catering to. Because that's part of it. This is all part of what slavery is, the language of it, and the fact that, slavery still exists today. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about, work per se. It could be slavery of the mind. Master of minds, for example. And no, I don't feel sympathetic for the Muslims in North Africa. I do not feel sympathetic for the blacks that were slaves in the United States for those reasons. I do not feel sympathetic for Jews who still cling on to the Holocaust, which happened in World War II and not today, as an excuse for an anti-white agenda. I do not condone that type of thinking because it is bias. It's not indicative to today's standards. And, that is going to garner a lot of hate against me, against people who they do know things about history and they may lie about it. And those kind of people are harder to deal with, but that's okay because they're not smarter than me. So anyway, I really wish I could have been able to comment on this particular video. What was it called? I'm not going to share the link because I'm in no way sponsoring it. I mean, I appreciate it for being there for a topic of discussion, but other than that, it can shut the fuck up. Okay, the title is The Original Slaves Were Not African. They Were European. Come watch. And the uploader is Samantha Derrick. And Derrick is spelled Derrick. It was uploaded about 3 years ago, and it's got about 11,000 views. It showed up on my recommended to watch list because I had watched a video debunking history on, regards to slavery, done by somebody else. I'll tell you his name in a second. He doesn't have his real names because he's a little bit of a coward, but that's okay. I forgive him because his point was solid. Hold on a second. I put it on my Facebook because I agree full-heartedly with what he said. Hold on. It's going to be a minute here. Oh, no, here we go. And it says Blacks Enslaved Whites First. And it is uploaded by, all in capital letters, Jews Control Media 911. And you want to know something? I believe his version's better. And, he didn't have the courage to show his face, as far as I know. I mean, this is simply a video on YouTube. Maybe he did, and somebody decided to put pictures there instead of his actual face. I have no idea. However, how he said it was better than how the Muslim pastor said it, because it is to advance an anti-white agenda, this perception and changing of history. And there are whites in support of what this Muslim man had said slavery was, simply because they're covering themselves. And, I don't appreciate history being told inaccurate, but I also don't appreciate history being told in a manipulative way that's anti-white, which is exactly what that video was about. So that person would not allow comments on that video, but I have a proper rebuttal in the video I'm making right this second, because I don't agree with how that information was brought about. The story was told incorrectly. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. There are other things I could say, but I won't. Anyway, you people have a good day and get your facts straight.